I'm Sandra Geyer. I'm a soprano singer, a broadcast presenter and a braille music teacher, and a very warm welcome to the final episode of our journey through braille music, a series in 6 episodes, which is revealing what braille music is all about. In this episode, summarising what we've learned and pointing to a range of available resources, I'm joined again by James Risdon.
Hello.
And James Bowden.
Hello.
Now, James and James have been with me through various stages of our journey. Now, if you're listening to this and you've never heard any other episode in this series, James and James, could you introduce yourselves?
So I'm an organist and a pianist and love how ingenious braille music is.
I'm a recorder player and learned most of my repertoire from braille, and I worked for several years in the RNIB Music Advisory Service, where I taught braille music, wrote some resources and met dozens of braille music learners and teachers.
Now, we've covered a lot of ground in this series, and I, for one, have enjoyed meeting other musicians who share my passion for braille music. Could you give a quick overview of the previous podcast episodes? James Risdon, let's start with you.
Sure. So in episode 1, we looked at some of the history and background to braille music. After that, in episode 2, we considered the basics of how this works for solo instruments. In episode 3, we looked at vocal music.
Then in episode 4, we explored how braille music works for keyboard instruments such as the piano. Episode 5, we talked to Melanie Wren, who's a braille music transcriber, and her work. And finally, in this episode, we're trying to wrap things all together.
Now, I'm wondering if either of you have made any new discoveries in the series.
Well, I enjoy singing, so hearing Claire Guylands talk about the range of vocal music which is available in braille and how they can be used in different settings was very interesting.
I'm always interested to hear from transcribers about how they do what is an amazing and highly specialised job. So for me, the episode with Melanie Wren was particularly interesting and enlightening.
I've known braille most of my life. I've never really stopped to think how remarkable it was that Louis Braille invented not only the literary code but also music as well. It's impossible for us to imagine a world without it, but that's exactly what Louis Braille was born into. I wonder what he would make of all the computers and software and technology that we have today. He clearly had a very creative and analytical mind.
Yes, I mean, I found hearing about transcription from Melanie Wren remarkable too, because I receive a lot of transcription in braille, but it was nice to consider it from the transcriber's point of view. And I couldn't agree more about Louis Braille. Now, I'm sure he would be thrilled to know we're here discussing his legacy nearly 200 years later. In the 21st century, how can people get involved with braille music, learning it themselves or teaching a student? Do either of you have any good suggestions for courses or books for getting started? James Bowden.
Well, as you can imagine, the internet is actually quite a good place to get started. If you search for braille music, you'll get quite a few results. Wikipedia has a good page, and there's another good page on the RNIB website dedicated to braille music. And this includes a document to help people get started. I also like the page on the Braille Bug website. This has material specially geared to younger learners. Back in the UK Association for Accessible Formats has a music page which contains a link to a list of all braille music producers around the world, from Australia to Japan, Denmark to Italy, and so on.
That's fantastic. And people in the UK will probably be aware of the RNIB and that the RNIB produces braille music, but may not know that there are other countries also involved. James Risdon.
That's right. RNIB is one of the biggest producers in the UK, but even in the UK there are other transcribers such as Golden Chord who has a significant library of scores available. Actually, what's interesting is how different organisations are developing different offerings. So, for example, the Danish library that James mentioned have digitised their scores and can make these available on CD-ROM, while Germany's DZB Library are developing tools to scan hard copy print and convert it automatically into Braille, using transcribers and proofreaders for more complex works.
The other trend is that commercial entities and mainstream organisations are beginning to consider accessible formats for music. So the Braille Muse project in Japan has a digital library of over 1,000 scores which can be downloaded as Braille music. MuseScore are also considering how their collection of scores can be accessed in Braille using a technology called Music 21.
There is clearly plenty of available Braille music, but how do people develop the skills to read it? James Riston.
Well, for tutor books, I would recommend in the UK Joan Partridge's Braille Music for Beginners, which was mentioned in episode 4. Meath Smith's Braille Music course and Lisette Westling's focus on Braille music are also both excellent, especially for younger learners. For parents or teachers who have a background in stave notation, RNIB produced a Braille music course which includes plenty of exercises which will take learners up to around grade 5 or GCSE level. While further afield, the Hadley School for the Blind in the USA offer a distance learning course which I know 1 or 2 people in the UK have worked through with great success. There are details of all of these publications and courses via rnib.org.uk/Braille Music.
Finally, if you're the kind of person who likes a list of everything, then the new International Manual of Braille Music Notation is online in various formats from the UCAF website, ukaaf.org/music. But that's more a reference book rather than a tutor.
That is a lot of ideas and resources, but what about if people want a person to ask or a Braille music teacher?
Well, there are several people in the UK who can offer Braille music tuition, but certainly not in every town. That said, the technology does exist now to enable distance learning, so you don't actually even need to be on the same continent to learn Braille music.
There are also a number of email groups for those interested in Braille music, such as the Braille-music-chat list on Yahoo, where you can always find people willing to share their expertise. And the Music Task Group of UCAF are also very happy to hear from anyone who wants to know more about Braille music.
Now, we've learned how Braille music gives independence to read, write and learn. Could you say something about its production in the 21st century?
Well, in a sense, the beauty of Braille music is that it is independent of technology. So the fundamentals of Braille have managed to keep up with technology over 200 years, from the hand frame to the Braille typewriter, now to the electronic Braille display. The fact that I can keep my entire Braille music library on a hard drive the size of a matchbox and print scores out on demand when I need them was unthinkable when I started learning. But while the technology for producing Braille and storing Braille has changed, the actual code has changed remarkably little.
Perhaps where the biggest potential lies in coming years, maybe, could be automated production of Braille music from a source file. So just as we can convert print books into Braille with minimal human intervention, imagine it to do the same for Braille music, and software is developing fast at this time. There are libraries such as Braille Muse project in Japan, which have 1,000 scores ready to download as Braille music. One of the advantages of this approach is that you can in some ways customize the Braille score. So, for example, if you had a grade 1 piece, you might want to strip out some of the extra signs in the teacher's score and just have a simplified score for the student. Imagine a world where you could find a piece of music online and convert it to Braille and then simply download it.
Exactly. However, I think there's always going to be a need for specialist transcribers for complex scores or producing scores that are tailor-made to the individual, for example, for educational purposes. It's also worth remembering that while we can look forward to a world where we can have Braille music on demand, we still need to take time to study it, learn it and memorise it, and there's no technology around that can shortcut that process yet.
Well, we're nearing the end of this episode and indeed our series. So before we finish, do either of you have a favourite piece of music that is in Braille or a favourite composer who was blind perhaps? James Risden.
Interestingly, not many people know that Rodrigo's famous guitar concerto, which is one of the most recorded pieces in history, was actually written in braille on a braille typewriter because Rodrigo was blind. I find that rather beautiful and inspiring.
I've always loved the music of Bach, but when learning from braille, I think you might find Beethoven or Mozart easier to memorise. And another interesting one is the composer Vierne. He was a blind musician and wrote several organ works.
I'd like to thank all our contributors and musicians who have joined me in this Journey Through Braille Music series, revealing what Braille music is all about. Thank you for listening, and we hope you found these podcast episodes interesting, enjoyable, and informative.